When discussing how to organize your modules in an Angular application, we first need to get a deeper understanding of what exactly a module is. Then, once we understand modules, we can begin to reason about how to organize our code with respect to them. Most people who get introduced to Angular quickly learn about modules and believe that modules are something like this. They believe that they are sort of a container for the objects in your Angular application, and bringing in a module brings in the code that belongs to that module. Also, one of the common things that people think is that modules provide a sort of namespacing. If you look at the diagram, you can see that there are two controllers named Controller1. Unfortunately, this is not how modules in Angular work today. Let's look at some code to see exactly how modules work. Here I have the simplest of Angular applications. This application has one module and one controller. I put them in the same file for convenience. Now look closely here. Notice that I declare the module here using this line of code, but when I create the controller, I add it to the module. Well, the module has no idea how many objects belong to it. That module is completely valid with no controllers or with 10 controllers. So what this means is that the module works just fine if only some of the objects that belong to it are actually present. So let's say that I separate this file into two files, one called app.js and one called controller1.js. If I forget to add a script tag for the controller1.js file to my HTML file, then the module doesn't care. It's still a completely valid module. My code might be broken, but as far as the module is concerned, it's fine. Now let's modify our example here a little bit. Let's add two submodules and another controller. And we'll put this controller in the app2 module, and then we'll make our main module depend on the other two modules. Now let's look at the HTML that we're going to be using. You can see that I've created a simple div that has the controller1, and that has a binding in there that shows the name off of the scope. If we go back to our code, we can see that the first controller has a name of controller1 and app2, and the second controller has a name of controller1 and app3, but they're both named controller1. So based on that, it's going to print out something at that name binding. I want you to guess what it's going to print out, and then I'll show you what it actually does. So what it's actually done is print out controller1 and app3. Why did it print that one out, do you ask? Well, it doesn't actually matter which order we declare our controllers in. If I take this controller and move it up, go back and refresh the page, we can see that the same controller is the one that actually gets the bindings. But if I go up here and I reverse the order of the dependent modules, and then I refresh my page, we can see that the active controller is now changed. So the module order is actually what determines which objects are the ones that are used by the Angular system. So what is going on here is that Angular is actually creating something called an injector. That injector is the namespace for the objects. There's only one injector for a given Angular application, so only one object of a given name can exist in the injector. This means that there can only be one controller named controller1 in the entire application. Now we also need to understand here that an application is not the code, but instead the collection of code that is running in the browser at a given instant. If you browse to a different page, then you can change which files are delivered to the browser, and at that point a new Angular application is created and a new injector is created. So here's a more accurate diagram of how modules and objects and the injector interact. You can see that the objects, as they are created, actually are controlled by the injector, and the module plays a much more secondary role. You still have to create every object in exactly one module, but when it gets created, it really lives in the injector. Also note that the name of the object is its entire name. The module has nothing to do with namespacing, so it therefore has nothing to do with the object name. Now I should let you know that this diagram is a bit of a simplification. The Angular internals are quite a bit more complicated than this, and there are some differences when it comes to controllers versus services versus filters versus directives. But what I have told you is enough knowledge for us to talk about how we might organize our code into modules and what some of the benefits and drawbacks might be for different methods of organization. Let's talk really quickly about one of the benefits of this loose relationship between Angular objects and the modules that they belong to. Imagine this scenario. I have two modules in my application, and let's say that I don't have a single page application, but instead a site with several pages, and only some of those pages use Angular. Furthermore, on a specific page of my website, I need to do some stuff with Angular. Say I want to display the current user schedule, but on this particular page, I don't need to do everything that I have code for, like I won't need to handle registration in any way. Well, the beauty of the loose tie between a module and its objects is that if this happened, and I only delivered these two files to the browser, then so long as I don't try to use any functionality from any missing code, then my application will work just fine. Let's review with a brief quiz. Modules are a namespacing mechanism for Angular objects. True or false? The answer to this is false. Modules have nothing to do with names of objects. What is the name of the Angular object that has a list of all the objects in your application? This is the injector. How many injectors can exist in each Angular application? Only one injector exists in each Angular application.